positions on the planet at the same time. And they didn't even get to see each other. It's such a shame. Anyway, that often happens in history. My point is simply that to improvise means to be well prepared. From an Anisa point of view, being well prepared means to have internalized the theory. So to get back to my cooking analogy, if a cook is a master chef, he is a master chef because he knows the theory of cooking, or the chemistry of cooking. And that means then when he comes to make up a new recipe, which is improvising, he can do it better than anybody else. This part of the word means to see. Vision comes from the Latin video, where we get videotape or audio visual, or a visor. You know, you wear a visor. That's a thing that shelters your eyes so you can see better. An advisor is somebody who helps see with you the best way to go. Pro means before, so provise or pro-video means to see before. In other words, you see something before you do it. Impro video, means no. So impro video means you can't see beforehand what you're going to do. So to improvise means to be able to do something before you can see what it is you're supposed to do. So an improvisation is an unplanned action made up on the spot to accomplish something. And it takes terrific preparation to be a good improviser. Has anyone here been to one of these theater operations, the improvisational theater? Have you ever seen any? Yes. You've been in some, maybe. Well, you know that the ones that are really good, the people who do it, have a lot of preparation. Now, some people get good preparation in their lives. They're always making up something on the spur of the moment. And so they are expert at flying by the seat of their pants. And, you know, there's an element of that that's good teaching. You can put things together right on the spot. If you're not that kind of person, then improvisation will scare the liver out of you. You just don't like being spontaneous. Well, you don't mind being spontaneous, but you want 3 weeks' notice. Well, it's not spontaneous if you have 3 weeks' notice. Got to be able to do it on the spot, see. Good improvisation comes from having overlearned the area that you're interested in. And that means repeating it and seeing it in 1,000 different ways and going up and down and around the barn 1,000 times. Then you've overlearned it. Then when you're in the situation, you know what to do. Well, I had an experience once. I was giving a lecture to about 200 or 300 people on Anisa. And I was holding forth on some view. I can't even remember exactly what it was. It had to do, though, with matching an experience with developmental levels and so on, and the importance of it. And some woman in the back of the room suddenly got up and marched right down the aisle and plopped a 2.5-year-old kid on the table and said, "Show us." Well, I tell you, I had a little heart palpitation there. That's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to deliver on the spot. And here's this kid, so you know, it's a little bit upsetting to not be able to have at least 5 minutes to get your act together. And it was so totally unanticipated. And of course I could see her coming down the aisle, and I didn't know what in the world was happening, because I knew there was a door in the back of the hall, and there were no doors up here, so I know she wasn't coming to take her kid to the John or something. And so she just put the kid right on the table, had a table like this, a microphone, the whole thing. She just sat the kid down there and said, "We'd like you to show us. You can borrow my kid." Yes, well, I tell you, that's that's really putting it where it counts. So I said, all right. So I got down on my knees to look at the child and talk with her a little while to get to know her a little bit, because I got to establish some connection with this child. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. And besides, I need to buy a little time to think of what up in the world, what in the world I'm going to try out. See? So I decided to demonstrate something that another kind of pedagogical principle, namely that modeling for a young child is more powerful than explaining. And so I said, I'm going to now use this child to demonstrate this point. I had all my legs and eyes and everything crossed, hoping that it would come out all right. So I said, I'm going to explain to this child to do a little task with the chalk on the board. But as I explain it, I'm going to ask her to do it one specific way, but I am going to do it the opposite way. And you watch which way she does it. So I gave this little task that had to do with drawing a little diagram, and I explained her to do it one way, and I did it the opposite way, and I gave her the chalk, and she proved the thesis right away. There was applause afterwards, because it was so clearly demonstrated. She picked up the chalk and did it exactly the way I did it, in total violation of the way I told her to do it. Well, we know, I mean, there's that old idea of practice what you preach comes from that verity, from that truth, namely that it's far more powerful to see somebody do something than just hear them talk about it. Now, of course, you get double mileage out of the experience if the way you explain it is, in fact, the way you do it, so that you are practicing what you're preaching. That makes it doubly powerful. But most people will pay attention to what you're practicing rather than what you're preaching. And this child demonstrated this. Well, I was terrified that they wanted 3 more hours of continual demonstration. But they didn't. We took a little coffee break then. Everybody was a little weary. It was a good time for a coffee break, and we went on. But in most cases, we have tried out on some limited way, shape, or form every one of these propositions, so that we're pretty sure that we're just not talking into the breeze, that we know what's happening. Now, Mag left, and she was supposed to give me cues now. You're supposed to be giving me cues now, dear.
Talk about observation?
Well, no, that's a good thing to talk about for a minute.
Questioning?
One at a time now. You can't be a good teacher if you're not a good observer. And you can't be a good observer if you don't know what you're hunting for. You can't know what you're hunting for unless you have a theory. Science, Whitehead, demonstrates this to be the case. Now, a good observer also is able to see some things he wasn't hunting for. That has heuristic value, or, you know, many great discoveries were made by people who noticed something that they weren't looking for. To be able to look for one thing and bump into another and make something out of it is called serendipity. You ever heard that word before? You know where that comes from? Huh? Yes?
Something about some folk tale of the 3 princes of Serendip.
Yes, they were the princes of Serendip. And they were always heading up to do one thing, but something else always happened, and they capitalized on whatever it was that happened that they weren't supposed to be doing. X-rays, I think, were discovered accidentally. Somebody was hunting for something else and noticed something. Penicillin was discovered. In fact, he was very irritated. Whatever he was working with got moldy. But then he got interested in why certain molds were being killed. And that's how penicillin, the whole antibiotic thing, started. Harlow, the great University of Wisconsin psychologist who runs the primate labs there was interested in one line of research, and in the course of that noticed something else and changed his whole career. Maybe you know some of the monkey studies of the primate labs at University of Wisconsin. I would have more appropriately gone into that, a discussion of those studies, when we were talking about the affective competence, because he was very interested in what happens to a monkey whose emotions are, in a sense, disorganized by virtue of being isolated from other monkeys and being reared by not real mothers but wire mothers. He made some wire mothers, and they were lactating wire mothers and non-lactating wire mothers. Lactating means giving milk, and in the lactating wire mother there was just some stiff wire organized in the form of a monkey, much like a wicker basket monkey. Very cold, not very responsive, and they just had a place where they could stick a bottle with a nipple. And then so they had lactating wire monkeys, non-lactating wire monkeys, and they had the same wire monkeys covered with sponge and terry cloth that lactated, and then they had non-lactating terry cloth mothers. And the monkeys reared on the lactating terry cloth mothers were the most stable, and the ones who were the most wretched were the monkeys reared on the non-lactating wire monkeys, as you might think. And at the time I visited the primate labs, the baby monkeys reared on the wire mothers were just having their own babies. And these monkeys didn't even know how to have intercourse. So usually there's a kind of we think it's totally instinctual, but it turns out it's not absolutely instinctual. Not only did they not know how to have intercourse, they didn't want it. And so they had what Harlow called the rape rack. They sort of wired these poor monkeys on this rape rack and had the male monkey serve the female monkey and inseminate her. And then, of course, and I was up there right when those babies were being born, and it was really a terrifying experience because they ate some of their babies, and when you approach the cage of a normal monkey mother monkey, and she's just had her baby or two, and you approach the cage, she immediately puts the baby behind her, gets to the corner of the cage, and goes and wrinkles her lips and bites her teeth and makes a threatening sound, like, you get out of here, there's going to be trouble. When we approached the cage of the monkeys who had been raised on the wire mothers, they grabbed the babies and threw them at us and got in the corner. They had no sense of social responsibility or anything, no connection with the babies they had had. In fact, they had a terrible time even, it's as if the whole instinctual mechanism of caring, of maternal care, had completely been messed up by being reared in isolation. And that's why, Doc, when we were talking in the car yesterday, George was going on about, that's why I don't buy that thesis. Yes. We had a little discussion in the car yesterday about being detached and not needing other human beings. And I said, well, after you're 65, maybe you don't need anybody, but up to that point you do, especially in the early years. You better have some human beings around or you won't turn out very well. And all the animal studies show this. And in those cases where children have been reared in isolation, we see detrimental effects. There's no doubt about it. That was all by way of a digression dealing with observation. The connection was tenuous, but nonetheless it was there. You can't be a good teacher if you can't observe. And to be a good observer means to know what you're hunting for. And the point of that digression was to explain to you that if you're too intent on finding something, you may miss something else that's important. So you got to know what you're hunting for, but you got to have an open mind as well, so something else gets through if it's important. You have to notice things that you aren't necessarily hunting for. This is how important discoveries get made. Now, being a good observer requires some training. The reason you are observing is to find behavioral evidence which will let you know what's going on inside the child developmentally. The purpose is to gain some inside information by inference. We have worked with teacher after teacher after teacher who doesn't see anything but what's on the outside of that child. And they do not know how to make an observation which will yield information about what's going on inside. And if you deal only with the outside of the child's skin and how he moves and so on, and that doesn't give you any cue as to what's going on inside, you just tell me, how are you going to be effective with that child? So the purpose of observation is to find those things that enable you to make an inference about how he's doing. And that's why the theory is absolutely essential. Now, we have put together some preliminary experiments and experiences on teaching the art of observation. And we haven't really got it formalized, but want you to know that it's just in the offing. In the preparation of many student teachers, we have noticed schools of education require so many hours of observation. But for most, it is a waste of time. It is like making the practice objective in terms of time. So they go there and sit. They watch the watch. They say, well, we put in 32 hours of observation this semester. But if you ask, what did you get out of it? Practically zero. So the way we would go about that is to say, you have to go and watch 5 children until you are able to see thus and thus and thus and so, and to make an inference from it, and then to check out the inference in some way. But that's a little bit down the pike. For now, we just want you to know that keep your eyes open on what these children are doing. They are telling you 100 times a day who they are and how they're doing, if you can read the signs. We consider the preparation of teachers which do not include this kind of training and observation to be professionally irresponsible. And we just had the experience too many times of people working with a child for 6 months, and at the end of 6 months not knowing that child any better in 6 months than they did on the day the child walked in the door. Our system is designed to make you know and even appreciate each child in his specificity as fast as you can. And it can't take place terribly fast, and that's why in our staffing arrangement we have every teacher with the same children for at least a 3-year period, so that you have an overlapping system. This is one teacher, and this is another teacher. And as a child moves through the system, he's always working with somebody that's known him for 3 years. There's always somebody who's coming to know him for the first time. There's always somebody who's known him for 2 years, and somebody who's known him for 1 year. And then the one who knows him for 3 years leaves the scene, a new one comes on, but there's somebody who now knows him for 3 years. Ultimately, we think that's the only way you can do it. Because your own perspective on a child is bound to be biased, and you need to bounce it off somebody else's perspective. So if you have 3 or 4 there, you get it. The self-contained classroom is dangerous. It's got a lot of good things going for it too, but it's dangerous because no one person can be all things to all children every day. And we know what happens when a child has the wrong chemistry with a teacher. The whole school year can be a bomb out. We talked about that. This way, supposing the child doesn't get along in this year with his teacher, well, that's not going to be such a big deal because this is the last year with that teacher. And he knows, he's getting to know a new one here. He's already known this one for a couple of years. So there's enough going for him in the situation that he can make it. This organization of staffing is in part derived from what we know about how long it takes to observe a child to get to know him in his specificity. It takes about a year. And in the traditional system, at the end of that year, just when you are getting to know the child, where you can help him, bang, he's on to somebody else. And now you don't even have the opportunity to explain to the next person who gets him what you know. And that poor person now starts all over again. Isn't it ridiculous? It is a ridiculous system. So that point of observation is a very critical one. And it has implications for staffing, and that's one of the implications for staffing. That's why our theory of administration is derived in part from the theory of development, but it is also connected with the theory of teaching and the theory of curriculum, and you can see why. Our theory of administration is going to be something else, because it shows how people who are in decision-making positions can make the right decisions all the time on behalf of the child. At the moment, that's not the case. As you can well imagine, you can probably think up of 100 personal experiences where decisions have been made that weren't really to the benefit of the child. What was the next one, Mag?
Questions.
Questions. Questioning is an important pedagogical talent and skill because it is a key to guiding interaction. And you can look at it from a couple of points of view. You can look at the questioning from the child's point of view or from the teacher's point of view. The teacher can ask a question which will give her information about developmental level, which has implications for arranging environments and guiding interaction. Or the teacher's question can directly guide the child, because in the question there is the implication that the answer to the question will lead the child to do something differently from the way he's doing now. Very important to ask questions. Furthermore, questions are the chief linguistic way, the art of questioning is the chief linguistic way in which a child comes to relate to the unknown environment. What is this? How is that? Why is this? Where is it? What should we do? All of the WH words are words which orient a person to the unknown in a way that makes it manageable. It outlines the linguistic approach to unknowns. And if you want people to make a creative advance into novelty, which is making a step into the unknown, then you need to have ways of facilitating that step. I'm talking about a step of the mind. And one of the chief ways of doing that is the questions. So children need not only to be questioned because they need the model of it from the teacher, but they need to come to question because it helps formalize the way of managing the anxiety of facing the unknowns, and in fact, it fans and keeps alive curiosity. Now, of course, you know, children get to a point sometimes where they just ask a million questions, and they don't even listen to the answer. So, when a child is asking a question, you listen. And then when you give the answer, you make sure he listens. Otherwise, it'll just turn into a game. He won't listen to the answers. When our upward bounders came to Indiana State, the classes we found were dead because none of them would ask a question. And the older they get, the more inclined they are not to ask questions. The reason is that asking a question is, in part, a revelation of ignorance. And therefore, that's embarrassing, most people think. For a child, who cares? And for an adult who really wants to know, who cares too? But I remember looking at the students at the University of Chicago who learned the fastest. You know, the University of Chicago got nervous about the number of neurotic people they were admitting. And because they were coming from upper middle class, upper class homes where tremendous emphasis had been placed on achievement, but the kids hadn't been very well socialized. They weren't very comfortable with other people. And so when they got isolated from their families and so on, they often went on the skids. We had high suicide rates, so on and so on. So they decided to introduce another element, namely taking valedictorians of very tiny high schools out in the Midwest. So we got a very interesting group of kids. Kids who graduated from high school with 5 people in the graduating class. And they would examine them, and they'd take these students. And they had a certain kind of Western Nebraska stability, you might say. But they were unsophisticated. There were just hundreds of things they'd never heard of. And I noticed that those who suddenly were prideful and were embarrassed about revealing knowledge, took a long time for them to make any progress. The kids who said, to heck with that, I'm here to learn and I don't care, they just asked questions. They just grew and developed in all directions. And I had one of those young men in my dormitory. His name was Jim Keene. He's the one who came to me at Indiana State and did all those experiments and has become a wonderful neurophysiologist. But I remember he just would ask so many questions at dinner table, everywhere. What's this? What's that? And you just couldn't believe he didn't know all that. I remember once at dinner table, somebody was talking about an enema, of all things. And he said, what's an enema? And I said, Jim, you don't know what an enema is? He said, who goes there, friend or enema? I said, no, that's not what it means. Well, anyway, we tried to make the best of it as we went. But he just wasn't embarrassed. He learned so much. Now, when these upper bound kids came to Indiana State, they wouldn't ask any questions. So we said, all right, we're going to have a course in asking questions, asking pertinent questions. And we organized paragraphs of information that had a certain coherence to them, but you could not understand the final sentences in the paragraph because we deliberately put something in there where the leap was erroneous and would require filling in a gap. And the kid's job was to sense where the gap was, articulate a question designed to retrieve an answer from somebody which would fill that gap. That's what good questioning means. It means to sense a gap, an unknown, designed to get an answer that will fill it in. And we built into the program giving wrong answers.